Hello. I'm going to do a series of videos. Ever since I was 33, so 2.5 years ago now, I made a massive transformation, I suppose, a continual one. Since then, I made the decision to end my marriage. And it's been a constant soul journey processing childhood trauma since then. And whenever I share my struggles and how I've managed to overcome them with people, I've just found that the openness in sharing my vulnerabilities is helping others be open about their struggles as well. But also, I don't necessarily think that there's one way to heal, but in sharing the ways that have helped me, I'm just seeing a huge transformation in the people around me as well. So it might be a bit of an effort to go back through all of my aha moments, but I'll do my best to remember a lot of them. But I'll share one of my first ones, I suppose. But yeah, the catalyst was realizing that I wasn't happy and ending my marriage, which was a lot of pressure, because my parents had stayed together and I felt the expectation of making it work. We'd done everything perfectly. My whole relationship was micromanaged by societal expectations. And it was me finally realising to put myself first, because one of my trauma responses is being a people pleaser, and to actually consider my own feelings and not just that of others, that helped me push forward in making that decision. And my husband hadn't done anything wrong. It's just that we had both, we hadn't both. I had changed. I felt like I had grown in a different direction, and our paths were no longer aligned through no fault of his. Obviously, there were issues that any normal marriage had, which since the ending of it, and I may not have even been aware of all of them, but I've been able to go back and think and process and heal through that as well. But the main ones I've found come from childhood trauma, and our instinct is to react in the same way that we felt the first time we felt those things or were in a similar situation, or in a scenario that elicited that response the first time. And so our instinct, our subconscious instinct, is to react in that same way we did the first time. And so the last several years have been about me identifying first what the emotion is that is coming up in that moment, and then going back and trying to remember as far back as I could where that came from, what scenario elicited that emotional response in the first place, and going back. And one of the modalities which a psychologist friend of mine told me about was to go back and have compassion for myself in that moment, but not to victimize yourself. To go back, you cannot change anything about the situation. The situation has to stay exactly the same. But what would have needed to happen afterwards, what needed to be done, what needed to be said after that scenario for you to leave feeling whole, and go back and do that for yourself as you are now as an adult. Or so that's one method. But I do tend to go off on all the tangents, so you have to bear with me. The first one I would like to share in one of my aha moments was that growing up, I always felt a lot of expectations from my father, I suppose. I felt like I was never good enough, that he was always pushing me to be more. Like if I was proud of something, I'd be like, oh, like, look at this, Dad. He's like, oh yeah, and then offer ways that I could improve it, or like if I was good at an argument, it's like, oh yeah, you could be a lawyer, like, and I felt like he was always pushing me to be more, do better, which instilled a feeling of not being good enough in where I was at that time, what I was presenting at that time. And remember that while these emotional responses come from our parents, they are not the fault of our parents. Again, they are repeating the same response that they experienced as a child. It is literally just a dynamic. It is nobody's fault. There's no blame on anybody. It's just what is. It's just the dynamic, the repeated cycle. And anyway, this particular thing was brought to my attention when I was sat in the living room in our house, and my eldest daughter was dancing, and she dances beautifully. I love watching her. She's got so much emotion and expression in her moves, and the thought that came to my mind is like, oh, she could be a dancer. And I caught myself in that moment because I realised that I was doing the same thing that my dad used to do, and I had a overwhelming feeling of not only sadness or towards myself, I suppose, from this self-limiting belief, but realizing that I had misinterpreted the intention behind what he was saying as a child, and that all of those things that he was saying, like, oh, you could do this and you could do that, wasn't a reflection of me not being good enough in that moment and for me to strive to be better. It was his belief in me in being good enough to do those things, and he was getting excited in the prospect of my future because he could see, and I don't want to say potential, because the potential is inciting the feeling of being more than what you are, but seeing the talent in me that I was expressing in that moment, and that was his way of showing appreciation, was believing in me. But because of my limiting self-beliefs, I interpreted that as not being enough. And it was only when I recognised that in my daughter, I suppose from a parent's point of view, that I realised the intention was totally misinterpreted by my own self-limiting beliefs. That was an amazing aha moment for me, but it also was the stepping stone, I think, for me to realise that it's what we think about ourselves that interprets what we think about ourselves that generates these emotions to begin with, and it's based on our childhood, how we were responded to, because that's how we were taught to react in those moments. We copy our parents. So if a parent, for example, shows fear at seeing a spider, we're more likely to show fear when we see a spider. We look to our parents for their reactions in how we should respond as infants, as children, and then that becomes our subconscious way of responding until we can become conscious of the way that we respond and actively choose to do differently. So I just thought I'd share that initial realization, which is one of my earlier moments. After I separated from my husband, I then went on to buy a camper van, which I had lived in with my girls for the last 2.5 years. And yeah, it's been a roller coaster of emotions. I'm really, really trying not to be hard on myself. I don't think I've able to be fully present with my children a lot of the time, because I've had such I've had to internalize a lot. I've had such big emotions to deal with that I've not always been able to look outside of myself. I've had to really focus inwards, and to be present with them has been really difficult. But then again, that realization on its own has really helped me. I felt a lot of emotional neglect growing up, not having my parents' attention or wanting to play with me. But again, I recognize that now, as they had so much going on internally, emotionally, that it's impossible to look outside of yourself to extend that attention outside of you when you have so much going on internally is an enormous effort. And any emotion is physically draining. Like when you think about it as a child, or even now, if you experience a big emotional reaction or cry a lot, you often you feel physically exhausted afterwards. It's physically draining. Emotions are physically draining. And even if you're aware of them or not, they're still going on inside of you. And so that exhaustion can be a reflection of that. And yeah, to then expect people to function normally when they've got so much going on emotionally. It's just that recognition, I suppose, of where that comes from, and to not take it as a reflection of me. It's just how they were, how much they had going on emotionally at the time. And when you can separate yourself from that, when you can see, okay, that's theirs, this is mine, and to take that responsibility for your own emotions, but also to not take on the responsibility of other people's emotions. That's been the biggest gift, biggest realization that has really helped me navigate this process. So I'm gonna leave it here for now, because otherwise I will just ramble and go off on tangents. But thank you for listening, and if this resonates with you at all, then check out my other realizations, which I will share, my healing process. So thank you.